Today is Monday, September 17th, and this is The Drill. Thank you, and I am Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. Real-life examples, I like real-life examples of socialists, and particularly socialism in action. Our society is basically left in culturally, in terms of the way we communicate with each other and the way we think and view the world. We may be center right when it comes to politics, but that's not going to last very long. As long as we have a tendency to act left, act like socialists, then sooner or later our politics are going to reflect it, and our politics are more and more so. In any case, so one of the things that the socialists like to do is engage in power struggles. And you'll notice that in your day-to-day life is that if you're younger, then you probably never knew anything else. But if you're around my age, then you'll notice that there was a difference. That back in the day, issues were about right and wrong. What's right, what's wrong. And you could have arguments or discussions about who is right or who is wrong. But it wasn't by and large, it wasn't a power struggle. An example of that is that I remember I was talking to coworkers, and they were talking about road rage type incidents. You honk at somebody, and then the person then stops their car, and then gets out of their car and comes over to confront you. And when they say, well, and you shouldn't then roll up the window and call the police, you shouldn't do that. And then they're talking about how some people, though, if you go to a person goes to confront that other person who honked at them, then the person that's doing the confrontation might end up getting shot dead. And that they'd heard of an incident in which somebody got shot dead, and the people that shot him just simply drove away. Well, the whole thing with all of this is the right and wrong. Yeah, I honk at people. Yes, I flip them off, and I expect to be honked at and expect to be flipped off. I make mistakes on the road. I like to think I don't make that many, but I do make mistakes from time to time. I get myself in a situation where I made a wrong turn. I did whatever. Even every once in a while, even as well as I know the city I drive in, every once in a while I get stupid and I drive the wrong way. Just very, very short period, maybe 100 yards or not even that, down a one-way street. Okay, the ultimate in stupid. And so I do that, and if I bullocks up traffic, I deserve to be flipped off. You don't hear that much about it deserved anymore. Well, so-and-so deserved it. They deserved this. They deserved that. You don't really hear much about that because that goes along the lines with ethics in terms of, and justice. Somebody's guilty of something, what do they deserve? In any case, so if I get flipped off and it's legit, I'm too slow, I'm making some kind of a mistake, then I put my hands up like, hey, you got me. You got me. I screwed up. I copped to it. I'm not going to pull the car over and then get out and try and mow somebody over this. Because it's not a power struggle. It's an issue of right and wrong. And if I'm wrong, fine. I'll take the hit, I'll take the gaff, the horn honking, and being flipped off. So, and again, with today's society, more and more it's about power struggles. Like I said, with the car, if you honk at somebody, then you may get a power response. Not a response of right and wrong, but a power response. So, another example of that occurred over the weekend, where it was a football game, and a player, one of the professional players, at halftime, he'd been playing during the first half, and at halftime he decided that he's done with his career and that he's going to retire. And so he retired on the spot. He didn't even bother to come out for the second half. Okay, so I assume that he got changed, got showered, got changed, cleared out his locker, and left. Okay, so this is a typical left-wing move. Now, I don't care how the guy votes. He could say that he votes for every conservative in America, that he listens to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and on, and watches Fox News. I don't care. He's left. Because if you engage in a behavior that says might makes right, okay, because that's what this says. It says he asked himself, do I have the ability to retire on the spot? Answer, yes. Then it's okay for me to do so. That's what might makes right means. And the ends justify the means. In other words, you do whatever you think you can get away with. Yes, I have the ability to go ahead and retire, and will I have to suffer any consequences? Can I get away with it? Of course I can get away with it. All I have to do is I just retire, and that's it. What are they going to do? Kick me off the team? They're going to put me on the bench? Okay, so I'm sure for him, his standpoint, this is perfect. I don't feel like playing the rest of the game for whatever reason, so I'm going to retire. I can do it, therefore it's okay for me to do, and there's nobody can stop me. So the ends justify the means. So the thing is, though, what he's doing is wrong, and it's wrong because it's rude. It's rude to the fans. It's rude to your teammates. It's rude to the owner. It's rude to the league. You owe it to people to give them advance notice. And by the way, when I say rude and wrong, I mean universally wrong. The left will talk about right and wrong, but they do so usually in a very narrow way, very narrow definition of right and wrong. They mean situationally, or that this is wrong just now, here, today, excuse me, but that maybe tomorrow it'll be okay. No. Right and wrong and ethics are there universal rights and wrongs? In other words, are there rights and wrongs that are right or wrong for everybody, everywhere, at all times? And this is a demonstration of an ethic that in which being rude is wrong for all people, everywhere, at all times. Now, it is true that what is considered rude varies from culture to culture and from a period of time to period of time. Exactly what was considered rude 2,000 years ago may not be the same thing as what's considered rude today, or will be considered rude 2,000 years from now. But rudeness will be frowned upon, will be negative 2,000 years from now. Was rudeness was wrong 2,000 years ago. And again, for everybody everywhere, I don't care what culture you come from on the planet Earth, being rude is wrong. Okay, and so the same thing goes here. He was rude and for not giving everybody a heads up. And what he should do is make amends. Best way to do that, hold a press conference, say that I was wrong, I was rude to do what I did, I intend to make amends, and I intend to come out of my retirement long enough to maybe finish the season, or at least come out and I'll play another game next week, or I will come back out of retirement and take my punishment, however the coach wants to punish me, so as to make amends for my rudeness. And then after he's done making his amends, then he can announce his retirement, and do so giving everybody some lead time. Okay, I will retire effective tomorrow, effective next week, next month, that kind of thing. That's the way that this guy should handle it if he really wants to do what's right and thereby be conservative. Let me also say that being conservative is simply being a normal human being, is being a a polite member of society. It's just being a normal human being. You do what normal human beings do. You're not looking to take extraordinary measures. You're not looking to, again, agitate for change or agitate for a perfect society. You do what normal people do. And normal people consider the feelings, consider other people. We live in a society, and you consider other folks. That's just what normal people do. So it's not even really an issue of conservative versus socialist. It's really an issue, when you get right down to it, of normal behavior versus abnormal behavior. And that retiring in the middle of a game, much less in the middle of a season, most players will give heads up or advance notice that they're going to retire at the end of the season, but they don't do it in the middle of the game. Okay. That's normal behavior, and it's normal to go ahead and let people know to consider other people's wishes, other people's feelings, and just consider the fact that they're there. Have a little bit of respect for other folks. So today, I got three things else that I'm going to be discussing beyond my little monologue here. First of all, Rush Limbaugh and the a mistake or mistakes that he has made from Friday from his transcripts, and then how to do it right from Tammy Bruce and from David Horowitz. And that's when we come back. Okay, so thank you very much. And like I said, it's going to be Rush Limbaugh, Tammy Bruce, and David Horowitz this morning, because it is a little after 9 o'clock here in California. And so specific, I don't know if we're on daylight or standard time, but anyway, specific time. So with Rush Limbaugh, I'd like to point out with him, and if I had more transcripts, and I'm trying to look for, looking for transcripts for Sean Hannity. And if I could find them, then I would, spend more time critiquing Sean Hannity, of course. And same thing with Glenn Beck. I don't find much in the way of transcripts for their shows. But anyway, so that's why I spend a lot of time picking on, or seeming to pick on, Rush Limbaugh. Also, Rush Limbaugh was the first. And he's somewhat the leader. He's somewhat the guy that sets the tone, sets the pattern for everyone else. That everyone else seems to, all other so-called conservative pundits want to emulate. So that's part of the reason I go after him. And he is, again, wrong today. And part of the thing that he's wrong about is he's back to his old tricks of acknowledging and refuting the unrefutable or irrefutable from the standpoint of being arbitrary. The left makes an arbitrary claim. Here's Rush Limbaugh to say, no, that's not the way things are. Things are different than that. They're like this or that or the other thing. And the left has really never made the case for their point of view in the first place. They've never provided evidence or any type of proof. So let's see what we got here. This is about, he says, pushing back against all the lies. Rush, while the Democrats and the media wanted a destructive hurricane, let's all admit it, they were hoping for disaster. They wanted to validate their politics-based hysteria on something like the weather. See, a Category 5 hurricane would have been seen as validation for global carbon taxes, massive regulatory control of the economy, and getting rid of Trump. You could blame Trump for a Category 5 hurricane. Thing is, Trump's a Category 5 every day anyway, so what would be the big deal? And Johnny Donovan. And now, from sunny South Florida, it's Open Line Friday. Rush. Mr. Limbaugh, don't you feel the slightest bit hesitant making these kinds of charges? No, I don't, folks. There's no question about it. Even if I had a story from a website, I even had a story from a website called Grabian News. The headline, Media Politicized Florence. Blame Trump for storms. Predict mass death. Subheadline, Trump is actively making the problem worse. Subhead, Limbaugh assisting Trump making the problem worse. Trump and I both said to be complicit in Hurricane Florence because you know why. Rachel, because we don't agree with climate change. And since we don't agree with climate change having an impact on this, then we are responsible for people who may not be leaving. Oh, that's another thing. People who are not leaving have become a new target for the drive-by media. Laughing. So a couple of things here. First of all, again, the whole idea of the media blaming anybody for global warming without evidence, without proof, is an arbitrary claim. And arbitrary claims, as Ayn Rand has noted, have to be ignored. Now, he can come out and he say, here's a headline about me that I did or said something, and it is an arbitrary claim, and I'm going to ignore it, and I advise you to do the same thing. So, and that's basically the way he should deal with that. The other thing that's a little bit more subtle, where he's been influenced by the left and doesn't even really realize it, is when he says, let's see, Trump and I both said to be complicit in Hurricane Florence because, you know why? Because we don't agree with climate change. And since we don't agree with climate change having an impact on this, then we are responsible for people that may not be leaving. No, it's not because that's not the way he should have phrased it, because the way he phrased it indicates that there is no reality, that reality is what the majority says it is, and that everything is really mere opinion, and all opinions are equal except as to popularity. Not true. So he could have made a stronger statement, a more accurate, a more truthful statement by saying, because Trump and I know that global warming is a hoax. That would have been much more powerful than we disagree with it. Okay, because that's, again, leaves people with the impression that that global warming is a matter of agreement or disagreement. And you leave it like that, it empowers the left, because that's what the left is trying to do. They're going to create. They know that global warming doesn't exist, but they want it to exist. You see, and how are they going to make it exist? Well, since they don't believe in anybody that's normal knows that hurricanes are a metaphysical reality. We have no bearing on them. There's nothing we can do about that. Okay, so making something happen with regards to the weather, with regards to climate, is impossible. Any normal person knows that. The left, however, denies metaphysical reality, and that hurricanes are an attitude issue, an attitude problem, the weather, that all realities are man-made realities. Let's put it that way. And so, if hurricanes are man-made, then they can be done away with by man and by man's efforts. So it's simply the way they're going to, and that can be done, and things can be created that you would normally not expect to be able to create. For instance, global warming. No, global warming doesn't exist. They know it, but they want to create it. How do they do that? They can't do it metaphysically, so what they're going to do is do it by vote. They're simply, if they can get enough people around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world, to believe in global warming, then it doesn't matter what Rush Limbaugh says. It doesn't matter what I say or you say or somebody else says. Okay, because all the things that the left wants to do to combat climate change will be up for a vote. Carbon taxes, etc. And so the rest of us will simply, metaphysical reality and the rest of us normalcy will be out the window. Will be impotent in the face of this political pressure, giant political pressure. In the meantime, what they've got to do in order to create the political pressure and the political will is create psychological pressure. What they're also doing when they blame Rush and Trump is they are telling everybody else, don't follow their lead, or we will punish you too. Make no mistake. That's what they're trying to do, is punish these people, isolate them, shame them, and encouraging everybody else to stay away. Don't listen to them. Don't follow them, or you will suffer the same fate. And if they can do that and get the people that are normal to shut up, then it's the freaks, like the ones on the left, that end up just walking in and taking over, because the battlefield is clear of any resistance, so they don't need to put up a struggle or a fight. They just simply walk in and take over. So, again, it would have been much better, it would be stronger for him to say, not because we don't agree with it, but simply to say because it's a hoax. Because that's what he usually calls it anyhow. Most of the time he calls it the global warming hoax. This would have been a perfect place to put that in, that we are attacked because we know that global warming is a hoax. So, on to, so that's the way to do it wrong. And I'm going to give you some examples from Tammy Bruce and David Horowitz on how to do it right when I come back. And thank you very much. And like I said, just got done with Rush Limbaugh. And so on to Tammy Bruce and David Horowitz. But one that somebody I didn't get to last week that I want to make sure I get to this week is Ayn Rand and her interview from 1964 with Playboy magazine. So here it is. Playboy, how about Richard Nixon? Rand, I'm opposed to him. I'm opposed to any compromiser or Me Tooer. And Mr. Nixon is probably the champion in this regard. Playboy, what about President Johnson? Rand, I have no particular opinion about him. Playboy, you are a declared anti-communist, anti-socialist, and anti-liberal, yet you reject the notion that you are a conservative. In fact, you have reserved some of your angriest criticism for conservatives. Where do you stand politically? Fair question. Rand, correction. I've never described my position in terms of negatives. I am an advocate of laissez-faire capitalism, of individual rights. There are no others. Of individual freedom. It is on this ground that I oppose any doctrine which proposes the sacrifice of the individual to the collective, such as communism, socialism, the welfare state, fascism, Nazism, and modern liberalism. I oppose the conservatives on the same ground. The conservatives are advocates of mixed economy and of a welfare state. Their difference from the liberals is only one of degree and not principle. And I've made that same argument, that basically the conservatives, this ersatz or false conservatives in the country, are conservative because the left tells them that they're conservative. The left came out some decades ago, back in the 70s or 80s, and said, look, from now on, where you stand politically is going to be where you stand on the issues, and we're going to decide what those issues are. And so they set everything up so that the people that support these left-wing issues are the heroes, and the people that are in opposition, the conservatives, are the villains. Okay, so conservatives have a tendency to want to compromise because they go, and the conservatives went along with this, by the way. They didn't protest. They didn't say, well, you know what, you go ahead and do your thing if that's what you want to do, but we're going to continue doing things the real way, the normal way, which is we will decide for ourselves as a party where we stand politically, and we will do it through our conventions and through the creation of platforms, the platform or convention platforms. So they didn't do that. They just fell right in the basket and said, oh, okay, abortion is an issue. Okay, well, we'll be anti-abortion. Environment, okay, we'll be anti-environment. Peace, we're anti-peace. Fine, we're pro-war. And no wonder they're so eager to compromise, because they're stuck. They've been goat roped into positions that are untenable. Okay, it's just that are politically, socially, ethically untenable positions. You just can't. There's just no way to support it. So, of course, they want to compromise as fast as they can because they look bad. But the way to do it is not to compromise. It's to not get yourself into this position in the first place. Again, I use the dinner table analogy. Republicans get invited to dinner by the Democrats. They show up and they find out that there's no silverware. So instead of making a fuss and saying, I tell you what, we're going to go ahead and leave. Let us know when you've provided us with silverware and we'll come back. No, they just sit down and eat with their hands. And then they're flabbergasted and can't understand why it is everybody thinks of them as being backwards, troglodytes, unsophisticated, etc., etc. The reason is because of their own stupidity. Quit acting stupid, wise up, make your own bed and sleep in it, so to speak. Back to the interview. Playboy, you have charged that America suffers from intellectual bankruptcy. Do you include in this condemnation such right-wing publications as the National Review? Isn't that magazine a powerful voice against all the things you regard as statism? Rand, I consider National Review the worst and most dangerous magazine in America. The kind of defense that it offers to capitalism results in nothing except the discrediting and destruction of capitalism. Do you want me to tell you why? Playboy, yes, please. Rand, and I want to interject here, of course Playboy does. Playboy's left-wing. They love it when, especially somebody that they consider is on the right, savages the right. So, of course they want to hear this. Okay, so let's see. Yes, please, Playboy says. Rand, because it ties capitalism to religion. The ideological position of National Review amounts, in effect, to the following. In order to accept freedom in capitalism, one has to believe in God or in some form of religion, some form of supernatural mysticism, which means there are no rational grounds on which one can defend capitalism, which amounts to an admission that reason is on the side of capitalism's enemies, that a slave society or a dictatorship is a rational system, and that only on the ground of mystic faith can one believe in freedom. Nothing more derogatory to capitalism could ever be alleged, and the exact opposite is true. Capitalism is the only system that can be defended and validated by reason. So one of the things that occurred to me in this one is that about, where is it here, which amounts to a admission that reason is on the side of capitalism's enemies, is actually, when you get down to a lot of the reasons that conservatives are, and the magazine National Review was not a particularly good defender of capitalism, is also because capitalists have gotten into, and conservatives have gotten into the habit of forgetting that life and philosophy and everything else is foundational. Politics being chief among those things. And that, right, like I said, foundational. So economically, let's take the economics as an example. So there's a lot of talk in the conservatives are anti-minimum wage and don't like unions and whatnot. But just take the minimum wage. So you'll see whenever there is a discussion, a debate about raising the minimum wage, the so-called conservatives come out and say, well, no, we can't do that. It's going to raise prices and create inflation, and the person that's making the minimum wage really isn't going to be able to get ahead, et cetera, et cetera. Now, putting aside for a second that a lot of the minimum wage has to do with, or is functionally benefits unions, people that don't earn the minimum wage in the first place. If unions want an excuse to earn more money and agitate for higher pay, the way to do it is raise the minimum wage. Okay, so then the skilled workers can go to their to the management and say, look, the unskilled workers are getting a raise in pay. We're skilled workers. We should definitely get a raise in pay. And there's a certain logic to that. But in any case, what conservatives need to do is say, return to the gold standard. We need to go back. That's what conservatives need to say. We need to go back. We've experimented with something called Keynesian economics, and we have created a paper economy, literally a paper economy, which has a tendency to be inflationary. That's why we have a minimum wage. That's also why we have Social Security and Medicare, okay, to help people on fixed incomes, the elderly, the unskilled, be able to live in a paper economy. Okay, the simpler but perhaps more difficult way would be to return to the gold standard, where the economy would have a tendency to slow down, your money would have a tendency to gain value. We would have a tendency to experience deflation. Okay, prices would have a tendency to come down, and there would no longer, in a gold standard economy, be a rationale for the minimum wage or for Social Security or Medicare or any of the rest of it, or aid to families with dependent children, general relief, etc., etc. Okay, we still have use for, we could basically turn the needs of the poor in this country over to, and we would be morally justified in turning it over to charities, where it belongs in the first place. So, but as long as we have an inflationary economy and the government is complicit in creating and maintaining this inflationary economy, the government has a moral responsibility to, again, the people on fixed incomes that have, such as the poor and the elderly. So that's that. I did want to get a little bit of Ayn Rand in here. So when I come back, a little bit of Tammy Bruce. Thank you very much. And so Tammy Bruce, brilliant lady, almost as brilliant as Ayn Rand, but Tammy Bruce has got a lot of insight about what it is that makes the left tick, what it is that makes them do what they do, how they think, and how and why they act. So she's written a book called The Death of Right and Wrong, and as I've mentioned before, it's not quite correct. Right and wrong will never go away. It will change its forms. Metaphysics is something that cannot be created or destroyed, and those things that are built on metaphysics cannot be created or destroyed. You can only change their forms. So, if we ever have a situation where socialists take over the United States, which won't happen, but if we ever did in fantasy world time, then right and wrong will still be here. It'll just be different. We'll have socialist norms instead of having capitalist or normal norms. Anyhow, so she's writing the book on the death of right and wrong, and she's gotten to the point here in a chapter where she's dealing with the cardinal virtues, 4 cardinal virtues. And from the book, here's how C.S. Lewis explains the cardinal virtues. This is what I'm referring to when I speak of these values in this book. Prudence means practical common sense, taking the trouble to think out what you are doing and what is likely to come of it. This is a no-brainer, and yet it is a value absent from the attitude and approach of the left elite, as of its subset, the art elite. Obviously, it requires some sense of selflessness and empathy, both of which are quite dead in the narcissist. Temperance refers to all pleasures, and it's meant not abstaining, but going the right length and no further. When I mention these words to my friends on the left, they begin to howl. You've got to be kidding. Certainly, this is a word not even spoken on the left, except perhaps in historical discussions of prohibition. Many gay men I know boast of hundreds of sexual partners they've had. For many, hundreds of anonymous sexual encounters a year is not unusual. These are representative of the people who laugh. They are the ones who have had to remember to take their cocktail of meds in an effort to prevent their HIV status from changing into full-blown AIDS. And there's a little Footnote here, our culture is one of wretched excess. From SUVs clogging the roads to the epidemic of obesity, we live in a time where there are no restraints. And that's a footnote from the virtue of temperance that she had defined. Let's think about this, though, back to the book. If there was ever a time when going the right length and no further should be encouraged, it is now. And now she puts right back, anyways. Our culture is one of the wretched excess. From SUVs clogging the roads to the epidemic of obesity, we live in a time when there are no restraints. Alcoholism, drug abuse, and sexual compulsion haunt our lives. The left's rejection of a values-based society compels us to avoid dealing with problems such as these in the context of personal responsibility. Instead, they're labeled disabilities, diseases, or, of course, alternative lifestyles. They're also part of determinism. The idea that we have no free will, that we do what we do because we are forced to by powers beyond our control. And she's talking also about the left's rejection of a values-based society. The left's definition of happiness is the ability to do what one wants whenever one wants. Their deal of happiness is hedonism. And hedonism, the motto of hedonism is, if it feels good, do it, which is a prescription for impulsivity, or as Ayn Rand so awkwardly put it, whim worshipping. So impulsivity, and you cannot be impulsive and be temperate at the same time. As a matter of fact, I don't think you can be impulsive and exercise or demonstrate any of the four cardinal virtues at the same time. Okay, third cardinal virtue, justice, is the old name for everything we should now call fairness. It includes honesty, give and take, truthfulness, keeping promise, and all that side of life. This seems pretty obvious to most folk. It is a value, however, that I've found missing in the left's most powerful elite. I think it's safe to say of Bill Clinton, Jesse Jackson, Teddy Kennedy, Gary Condit, Hillary Clinton, and the people of their ilk, that this virtue doesn't even remotely touch their lives. I know from experience, and you can see from the condition of our culture, that it is certainly not a value embraced by the feminist and gay elites of this country. And the last of the virtues, fortitude, includes both kinds of courage, the kind that faces danger as well as the kind that sticks it under pain. Yeah. Guts is perhaps the nearest modern English. You will notice, of course, that you cannot practice any of the other virtues very long without bringing this one into play. Although I have another book on the four cardinal virtues by a man named Piper that suggests that prudence is the master virtue, that no other virtues are possible without prudence. So, anyhow, refreshing, very, very refreshing. You rarely hear, this is a woman that used to be on the left, and we've got to hear from her about fortitude, about the four cardinal virtues, instead of hearing about it from Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, et al. The people that you would expect to hear about virtues and be giving definitions of virtues and whatnot. So again, this is why I like Tammy Bruce. She's on the radio. She used to be on the radio in L.A., but I haven't been able to. She's been off I think she was on KBC for a while, and I haven't been able to find her anyways. I got to look her up and see where I can find Tammy Bruce on the radio and make an effort to listen to her broadcasts. It might be a good thing. Then I could maybe use some clips of her broadcasts for my podcast. So when I come back, another good person, another one that does it right, David Horowitz. Thank you very much. David Horowitz is the next book that he's got a book called The Black Book of the American Left. Basically, it's like an expose of the American left and how they think and how they operate, et cetera, et cetera. And Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity both think they know the left. They've got all the understanding of what the left is really all about. They don't. Their analysis is always shallow. It's always political. It is Tammy Bruce and David Horowitz that understand the psychology and the culture of the left, how they operate, and what they look to do. So in this particular chapter, we're talking, it's about how it is exactly that he began to convert. He goes from being a lefty to being a conservative. I had not seen or heard from Art Goldberg or Marty Kenner for 15 years when I received Art's letter. On reflection, it seems obvious what provoked the communication. I had just published a book called Hating Whitey and Other Progressive Causes. One of those chapters was a memoir of Betty's death called Black Murder Incorporated. Obviously, this chapter was what prompted him to contact me. In addition to Art's denial in the letter that he was political anymore, what I found most interesting was the fact that, though I had written hundreds of pages on the details of Betty's murder, my sense of responsibility and guilt over what happened and the devastating impact on myself and my family, Art seemed unaware of any of it. And this is a copy of the letter. November 19th, 1999. Dear David, every so often I hear about something you've written that pisses somebody off, but I don't much care because I have pretty much retired from politics. One thing I've been meaning to tell you for years, however, concerns the death of Betty Van Patter, the Rampart's bookkeeper. In my mind, you are the person responsible for her death. Sending her in to audit the Panthers' books at that particular time was tantamount to dressing her in a Ku Klux Klan white sheet and sending her up to 125th Street in Harlem or to West Oakland. I distinctly remember warning you to be careful about getting too involved with the Panthers because things were getting pretty crazy at the time you jumped in. I had pulled back. Marty Kenner had pulled back, and so had Stu Albert. Had you asked Stu or myself, we would have urged you not to send Betty into the school under the circumstances in which you did. The fact that you let Betty deal with them directly was incredibly naive on your part and shows that you had no idea of what was going on with the Panthers at that time. If you had asked Stu, myself, or Marty, we would have told you. Kenner, after all, knew a lot about the Panther finances as he was a major fundraiser. Nothing happened to him. The problem was that you were inexperienced and naive, and Betty Van Patter got killed because of it. That's why, whenever anyone brings up Betty's death after you've written about it or alluded to it, I always say it was really Horowitz's fault. He set her up. As I said, it was like putting her in a white sheet and sending her up to Harlem. Just wanted to let you know what I've been thinking. Peace, Art. Here is the answer I sent back. December 12th, 1999. Dear Art, unlike you, I don't pretend to have retired from politics. And unlike you, I try not to lie to myself. Having become a conservative, I am prepared for how pathetic, vicious, and disloyal some human beings can be, and how sublimely unaware of the disgusting image they present to others even as they preen their moral selves for their own approval. As a result, your letter does not really surprise me. In fact, that you should have spent 10 seconds carrying around your insipid thoughts about Betty's death is laughable. Nonetheless, I thank you for revealing how ignorant you are about yourself and your friends, and how you are still wallowing in the evil that once engulfed us all. Marty Kenner, my possible savior. If only I'd thought of that. It was Marty, of course, who left the Panther School project in my hands, and without bothering to say why. The same Marty was so far from thinking the thugs he was among were bad guys, and 10 years later he attended the great Huey P. Newton's funeral as a fan, and then played the role of behind-the-scenes sponsor of Panther Field Marshal David Hilliard's self-glorifying book just before he became president of the Dr. Huey P. Newton Foundation and resident tour guide of historic Panther sites. Stupid me, why didn't I think of asking Marty for help? Nothing happened to Marty, as you put it. Nobody raped and tortured him and then bashed his head in, as I would phrase the same, because his nose was so far up Huey's behind right to the end that he couldn't get his tongue loose to annoy them, even if it had occurred to him to do so. Give this, at least, to Betty. She wasn't killed because she was white or stupid. She was killed because she had the integrity and the grit to talk back. She wasn't spineless the way you and your friends are. She was killed because she wasn't a feckless servant of rapists and murderers like you and Marty were then and apparently still are now. And Stu Albert? How could I have overlooked good old Stu when I was in need of advice? Stu Albert, the yippee genius who wrote a letter to Ramparts calling me a police agent because in an editorial I condemned the Symbionese Liberation Army's assassination of a black father of 3 children, whose only crime was to have been a superintendent of schools. According to Stu, my editorial gave a green light to law enforcement to carry out the richly deserved execution of Stu's beloved SLA fruitcakes. With stand-up talent like this, Art, you really should go on Leno. I see you are still crusading for social justice, going around telling anyone who has read my latest feeble attempt to write this historical record and show the world what we did, that it was really Horowitz's fault. He set her up, unquote. Don't worry, my friend, I'm not going to return the favor and say you did it and I didn't. Of course, you did write all those rave notices and cover-ups, encouraging others to help feed the Panthers' criminal appetites. Or has age affected your memory of this? But I'm still not going to tell people it was your fault that I got involved with the Panthers or recruited Betty, or even that you kept your mouth shut all the time I was down in Oakland putting my life and hers in danger. Of course, you've already prepared your alibi. You told me things were getting pretty crazy at the time. What was I supposed to make of that? Crazy could mean that the police were after them, that some of them were agents, or that these pressures were creating internal conflicts that I had to look out for. Did you tell me that Huey Newton was a fucking murderer and might kill me? Of course you didn't. In fact, everything you had written or said to me about Huey Newton told me exactly the opposite. And that is all you've ever written to anyone or said to me about Huey and his progressive gang to this day. But I still won't point my finger at you now or blame you for what I did then. I won't do that because that's how I fell into this mess in the first place, by blaming others for what I did or did not do, blaming them for my own malaise, and that's what your self-serving politics is finally about. Art, yours and Marty's and Stu's. It's about putting responsibility where it doesn't belong. It's about blaming everyone but yourselves. It's about getting others to blame anybody besides themselves for who and what they are. I'm glad you wrote this letter. It makes all the pain and the wounds inflicted on me by you and your comrades since then seem worth it, because it shows me what wretched human beings I was involved with when I was one of you, a member of the Progressive Vanguard and at war with the enemies of the people. Your letter shows me that in all these years you haven't changed a bit, but I have, and it's the only thing in this that I'm not sorry about. The peace benediction at the end of your letter was a really nice touch. David. So, let's see. Oh yeah. So basically, what he's saying here at the end of this, because he gets right down to the nitty gritty, where he says that it's about putting responsibility where it doesn't belong. It's about blaming everyone but yourselves. It's about getting others to blame anybody but themselves for who and what they are. What he's saying here is that he bought into the deterministic crap. Okay, because that's what the irresponsibility really means. Determinism is the philosophical theory that, again, that the individual is powerless. The individual has no free will, that the individual is determined by powers beyond their control. That there's nothing wrong with, therefore, there's nothing wrong with the individual, no matter what they do. If you're a pervert, if you're a child molester, you're a bank robber, you're a murderer, it doesn't matter, because you're forced to do these things by powers beyond your control. And that really the only way to change is to change the world, to change society. If you want to change the individual, you want to change perverts, you want to make sure there's no child molesters anymore, then we have to go to socialist paradise. We have to completely reform the entire planet. And that once that's done, then somehow, by magic, all of the bad people will simply disappear. They will no longer have a reason to do bad things. So, because again, the socialists believe everything, all of the problems, death. Death is simply a capitalist scheme to enrich undertakers. Disease is simply a capitalist scheme to enrich doctors and pharmacies. Okay, and that perverts and lawbreakers are simply a scheme to enrich the state or enrich prison guards and prison authorities, and to perhaps even more importantly, empower those individuals or those groups. So that was the conclusion of Chapter 9, and next time will be Chapter 10, Thinks Twice Before You Bring the War Home. And that was one of the big things back in the 60s, and again, the first 15 years of my life. First 15 years of my life. It was news, weather, sports, and the Vietnam War. And when the Vietnam War finally ended, I was shocked, because I was convinced that the Vietnam War would never end. In any case, brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. Thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.